Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Case IH. Solutions for every challenge. Equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining us here for This Week in Agribusiness. Last week was a busy one for agriculture with Chinese trade negotiations and the World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates outlook released by the USDA. According to that WASDE outlook, ethanol industry is expected to use about 5.5 billion bushels of corn. That's roughly level with last year. The industry, however, is looking to the future and trying to build that next level of demand. Joining us now to talk about it is Ron Lamberti. He serves as the Chief Marketing Officer for the American Coalition of Ethanol. And Ron, thanks for talking with us.
You bet. Thanks for having me today.
We've got the renewable fuel standard out there, the renewable volume obligations, the requirements for blending this fuel expected to come out soon. Ron, what have you heard? What are you expecting?
Well, I mean, you always hear all kinds of different things. The interesting thing from my standpoint, I work mostly with retailers and marketers, will be, what they do with the advanced biofuels and things like the biodiesel, that sort of thing, because that's kind of what takes up some of the extra in ethanol's 15 billion every year. We don't use 15 billion in gasoline to blend it in. So we do export a lot more now, and that's what we hope we'll be able to keep doing. But I don't expect a big change from anything. We've been talking to them about raising the conventional biofuels number at some point. I don't know if it's certainly not going to be in this year's, but hopefully they'll get the numbers out, and it would be nice to see some increases. But the market's pretty comfortable with ethanol and using more, so we can probably hit that number again and show them that maybe we can do even more.
Okay, so we'll see that coming soon from the EPA. We'll be looking ahead at how much they're going to be requiring us to blend. And of course, as you mentioned, Ron, a big part of that is what's happening with the other sectors of biofuel. And to that end, we've got the 45Z tax credit still floating around in Washington. Can you fill us in on where that sits and how it could impact the ethanol industry?
Well, yeah, actually, we got some pretty good news on that recently with, what's going to happen with it. A lot of the things that were in the Inflation Reduction Act are gone, but some of the things that we've got, good news on, if the reconciliation thing goes through, 45Z continued till I think it was 2031, and some of the things that, for example, we're doing this program with farmers about adopting new procedures for sustainable ag, and that's the projects like that. A lot of them got cut, but the parameters for it were in a different part of the bill. But the parameters for that are similar to what we're doing with our projects. So most of the money goes to farmers. That's kind of what some of the cuts were. But all in all, we're pretty pleased with what's happened with some of those things, and hopefully they'll go through as they're proposed.
All right, we'll be watching that. We're going to have to see some congressional action, but maybe they'll get moving there in Congress. And of course, Ron, we're hoping that ethanol industry folks get themselves moving to Sioux Falls this August. Can you tell us a little bit about the annual conference?
Yeah, we're having our conference, I think, for the first time in 20 years. We're having it in Sioux Falls, a new place that was built right on the falls, kind of a cool area of town, August 20th and 21st in Sioux Falls. Usually a pretty good turnout, people from the industry, people, trying to get new information, learn maybe more about old information. But yeah, it's in Sioux Falls this year, and we're kind of excited about that because we show off sort of a new and interesting part of Sioux Falls. And, you're right on the falls, which is kind of cool that time of year.
Absolutely. It's always nice to celebrate the ag industry, partner with folks who are also sharing your interests in the biofuels and ethanol space, and look ahead to what could be coming. Ron, if folks do want to get registered, where would you send them?
You go to ethanol.org, our website. It's pretty simple. Just remember org instead of com. So
that's the
key.
key.
You'll get there.
Ethanol.org. Yep. Ron Lamberti, thank you so much for filling us in this week.
You bet. Thanks for having us.
Our market segment this week is brought to you by Farm Futures. Keep up on these volatile commodity markets at farmfutures.com. And we're back, talking markets this week with Brian Basting, economist at Advanced Trading. Brian, thanks for talking with us.
Thanks for the opportunity to be with you, Mike.
This past week, we saw the soy market take center stage for a lot of traders with the China talks last weekend and the WASDE out this past Monday. Brian, what did we get for the soybean market out of those China talks?
The underlying belief, Mike, is that there is going to be a trade agreement reached over time. I believe that's the market's bias. Obviously, the tariffs are paused, as it were, for 90 days here. But I think the market is looking longer term here, looking at the WASDE report with a fairly aggressive new crop export forecast penciled in, that there will be an eventual agreement reached between the U.S. and China. So that supported the market pretty strongly after that WASDE report.
And you mentioned the WASDE report. There was a lot of concerns going in. Traders weren't sure what ending stocks were going to look like, how the USDA was going to interpret this trade war. Where did they end up coming in on soybeans?
I think the USDA was surprised, Mike, because they took the new crop carryout for 25-26 down to 295 million bushel. That was well below the average trade estimate. I think the average trade estimate was closer to 375 million bushel. So the trade was a bit surprised by that. The market was sharply higher there after the report. We had a little bit of follow through on Tuesday and Wednesday, and now pulling back a bit here on Thursday. But regardless, that carryout below 300 million bushel really places an emphasis on weather this summer here in the U.S.
Given the fact that we do have kind of the smallest carryout so far for this year, are you seeing growers make some sales on those November beans?
What we're picking up a bit, Mike, is that growers are cleaning up some old crop inventory from the 24 harvest. They're taking a look at that November futures at this point with a rally, but I think growers are wanting to remain as flexible as possible on new crop at this point, and I think that's a wise decision, obviously, with the entire growing season ahead of us, uncertainty about China, and so on and so forth, but they are taking a look at that. It's caught their attention. One other note I'd mention, Mike, with the soybean to corn ratio, November beans to December corn, improving quite a bit here the last 2 to 3 weeks. Any late planted acreage may be tending a bit more towards beans now if there were some indecision there on the part of producers.
All right, so we could see those acreage numbers climb in future government reports.
I think, I don't want to paint too much into that. I think the vast majority of producers had already made their decision in terms of 24 or 25 acreage, but maybe just a tint there to beans, maybe some hint on double crop down the road, Mike, if the weather conditions permit, if that bean market continues to rally.
All right, well, let's take our focus over to the corn market. We saw the July corn contract get real close to $5, didn't quite break it. Are we finding a move back to the upside here?
Well, we've had quite a bit of a sell-off here, Mike, recently. We've taken the old crop July contract down to the lowest level we've seen since December of 24. Really sharp sell-off. All that rally that we saw there in January and February has been dissolved. I want to make sure I give credit, though, to the U.S. producer. Did a tremendous job of marketing that 24 corn on that rally in January and February. Tremendous job. Now we're looking at a market that's going to be looking at 95 million acres, maybe a bit more compared to 90 million last year. The new crop market now, with the corn growing in the ground at a fairly rapid clip here, Mike, may struggle, but got the whole growing season ahead of us. I really think producers, in my opinion, should be as flexible as possible moving forward with the marketing strategies, because we've got a lot of months here yet where we're going to determine these yields for 25.
On the demand side, are we continuing to see corn exports stay strong? Are those foreign buyers still looking at U.S. corn?
Great point, Mike. Tremendous export sales again this morning. Over 60 million bushel, again adding to the old crop book. USDA did recognize the pace of old crop sales on Monday of this week, bumping up their export forecast. We think that export forecast maybe has a bit more to the upside the way things are panning out. A lot of that depends on how fast the Brazilian crop is harvested this summer.
We'll talk more about that when we come back with Brian Basting of Advanced Trading. Our market segment this week is brought to you by Farm Futures. Keep up to speed on these volatile commodity markets at farmfutures.com. And we're back, talking markets with Brian Basting, economist at Advanced Trading. And Brian, before we went to break, you mentioned that one of the things you're going to be watching this summer is that Brazilian corn crop coming to market. Fill us in. How big is that crop down there in South America?
Mike, the Brazilian crop received timely rains this year in April during pollination, and it looks like it's going to be much bigger than last year. Maybe not quite a record that we saw a few years ago, but very large. So that crop will start coming off, Mike, assuming normal weather, in July. Now, whether it works its way into the world pipeline in July or not, we'll have to wait and see. But definitely we get into August and September, Mike, that Brazilian corn will displace U.S. corn. And we're looking at a sizable decrease in U.S. exports all else being equal during that time frame because of the Brazilian supplies this year. So I think the U.S. is still the primary shop in town, if you will, for corn for the next 3 months. Then we get into July, particularly in August and September, the Brazil crop will really move into the world pipeline. The one caveat I'd add to that, Mike, though, is that the domestic use in Brazil is quite aggressive at the moment. Ethanol use is increasing and domestic feed is increasing, so that may temper that export pace just a bit.
As you look at where U.S. corn exports could be displaced from or pushed away from by this Brazilian corn, is it predominantly that Asian market? Yeah. Will they be following China's lead to secure more from Brazil?
Yeah, I think that'll be the big wild card, Mike, if we're looking ahead to 25, 26. Should the U.S. Reach an agreement with China, will China get their corn from the U.S. or will they, as you said, implement the trade deal that they built with Brazil a couple years ago? Big wild card there in the markets. But the Asian markets will lose some of that, quite a bit of that to Brazil, just price competitive wise.
All right. I know we've got the winter wheat tour going on in Kansas this past week. We've got the wheat market continuing to try to find a bottom in Chicago. Ryan, what are you watching here for wheat broadly?
Searching for demand, Mike. We did see a good export sales number for new crop wheat this week. Wheat maybe is trying to work its way into the feeding market, cattle feedlots out west, and the southeast market too, into the hogs and poultry. That may be an avenue for some of that wheat to go, but it's really working hard to get into that feed ration. Right now, wheat feels heavy though, Mike.
It still does. So there's not a rainbow coming for the wheat market anytime soon.
Eventually, low prices will cure low prices, will discourage planting, will encourage more usage. That moment, Mike, might not be till this fall, though, when we get time to plant wheat in the northern hemisphere. For now, wheat is definitely the weakest commodity we're looking at.
Any advice for growers watching this market continue to sort of weaken on the wheat side?
Just maintain flexibility, Mike. I think if you're looking at moving some bushels across the scale, maybe looking at reowning those bushels. We've still got the entire southern hemisphere growing season yet ahead of us in Australia and Argentina. So there is, eventually the market will turn. But for the moment, I think growers want to maintain flexibility in these markets.
All right. Brian, at ATI, of course, you help farmers manage their risk. And when we look out in the ag economy, not one sector has more risk right now than cattle, feeder cattle, and live cattle. How are you advising producers to manage
Tremendous opportunity at all-time highs here, Mike. You want to use the marketing tools available to defend your balance sheet. Really want to look at maximizing these high prices if you're a feeder cattle producer, for example, or if you're obviously feeding fat cattle. Take a look at take advantage of these high prices, but also remember what goes up will come down eventually.
These parties do have a tendency to come to an end, don't
yes,
they, Brian?
Do.
All right, well, lots to watch here as we get prepared for this next week. Brian Bassing, economist with Advanced Trading, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us this week.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead.
Well, Greg's been keeping an eye on what's impacting farmers around the country. And Greg, the weather in the Pacific Northwest, what do you expect to see next week?
No, back and forth in temperatures, some moisture from time to time. Pretty much par for the course. Mid to late spring weather of late. That continues on, but a big shift in weather is well underway across some of these spring grain areas of the Dakotas, southern Canadian prairie, coming off last week's wind-blown heat that sent readings in the mid-90 to near 100-degree range, coupled with humidity values down around 10%. So not only the rains of last week, but this system coming on through, generating some pretty good coverage of moisture, including some higher elevation snows again, northern and central Rockies. Back into that weather system making its way out of the Snake River Valley of the north, and later in the week, maybe a stray and weak weather system into the Pacific Northwest to Washington State, a stray shower there, but back to milder weather, dry time northern California, back into that weather system making its way across the central and southern plains under the midst of high pressure and clear skies, light winds. These same areas that were in the heat wave weather pattern could actually see a little frost and freeze into parts of the Dakotas and Canadian prairie as the week wears on. Here's the southern extension of that weather system making its way across the western states. Windy, cooler weather into the valleys of California. Maybe a little sprinkle into areas outside of San Diego. A couple of thunderstorms, dry base desert southwest and northward. The rough weather here across the plains, but the moisture of late has been appreciated and much needed. A long ways to go, though, with dryness and drought across the high plains areas. Winter wheat is still struggling. Nebraska on southward, where some active storm clusters get going as well for the mid to late portions of the week. Looks like drier weather along the divide and back into a quiet weather picture. Seasonal temperatures, some gusty winds into the valleys of California.
Greg, you mentioned the warm weather up in the northern Corn Belt this past week. Do they see a cool down next week?
A significant cool down, and matter of fact, a wide range of temperatures here from this Canadian high to heat generally about I-80 on southward, a jet stream moving along it, and we're out and off to the races with more clusters of showers and thunderstorms, heavy and severe. Had a couple of batches late last week, and this will be sort of a repeating phenomenon, but the moisture is needed and appreciated where those stands are looking good, and certainly planting progress is looking pretty good as well, number-wise into the western Corn Belt, but additional delays eastern and southern sections in particular as the week wears out with additional showers and thunderstorms, chilly high pressure into the northern plain states areas, and there may be some frost and freeze potential, would you believe, coming off some of those mid and upper 90s of a week to 10 days ago. Now there's some heat and severe weather and a couple of thunderstorms, but again, most of the action Oklahoma City, Wichita on to the east might break the cap across Texas. The heat wave weather's down across the Gulf Coast with windy, cooler weather moving into the desert southwest. Expectations of, a backdoor cold front, drop in temperatures, lower Mississippi Valley, some moisture needed and welcome across Texas. Most of the core of the heat along the Gulf Coast areas, windy, drier weather moving into the desert southwest.
Eastern growers likely to face more rain delays next week, Greg?
They will, eastern and south in particular. Boy, those numbers coming out of Ohio and along and actually south of I-70 have been very much behind the 5-year averages, but this moisture band into the northeast and New England is welcome. Here's the next low making its way out of the western Corn Belt areas, and with that, a pickup on showers and thunderstorms and pretty good coverages again from about the Motor City down to St. Louis, points south and east. So not much opportunity to gain access in those eastern and southern Corn Belt locales as the week wears on. Under the midst of this high that had readings in the mid-90s a week to 10 days ago, maybe some frost and freeze potential where skies clear, winds drop back. Again, more moisture for areas of the northeast and New England. Complex series of frontal boundaries. This trough over the southeastern part of the country. We're kind of riding the atmospheric hot ridge over the Gulf Coast areas. And the end result, showers and thunderstorms and pretty good coverages, heavy and severe. But the drought has wound down, not ended, but improved over the Carolinas down through Georgia. Boy, Florida is in a world of hurt here with extreme to exceptional drought. The showers and thunderstorms retooling across the southern plains, and with time they are on the move along this frontal boundary into the southeastern states, into the Piedmont. Hopefully some thunderstorm activity and moisture down through Florida. It is a push of cooler, drier weather moving into the southern plains states areas, taking the edge off the heat and humidity that's been dominant down there over the past couple of weeks.
Closed captioning this week is brought to you by Farm Progress. Their team of experts reports on innovative solutions and essential information for your farm business. Visit farmprogress.com to stay updated. With warm weather coming on, farmers across the country are watching for emergence of their crops, but they're also watching for emergence of weeds. And over the last decade, more American farmers have turned to Enlist beans from Corteva as a solution for some of their hard-to-solve weed management challenges. Well, joining us now is Hunter Bowman. Hunter works as a market development specialist with Corteva Agriscience. And Hunter, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Absolutely, Mike. I'm excited to talk with you about the Enlist weed control system.
Well, let's start with the basics here. What does Enlist bring to the table, and how can farmers utilize the multiple modes of action to keep everything working well in their fields?
So, when we talk about Enlist, Enlist is a trait within our genetics, and it's a part of the system. So within the Enlist system, you've got the Enlist trait in our genetics that allows for Enlist 1 and Enlist 2 herbicides to be applied over the top. When we talk about those herbicides specifically, or any herbicide in general with weed control, we always want to incorporate multiple effective modes of action. What I mean by that is, a herbicide that's going to have activity on a weed, we want more than one of those in each application. So when we start to get in, 3 or more herbicides in a tank mix application, at least 2 of those herbicides are generally going to have activity on your weeds that you're targeting. So when we look at, Enlist 1 specifically, we like to add glufosinate or Roundup as a tank mix partner. This allows us to get multiple herbicides on a weed so that we can get more effective control. And then it also prolongs that weed to surviving and then evolving and creating resistance issues.
That makes a lot of sense, Hunter. And as I understand it, Enlist, you can tank mix lots and lots of other products with it. Is that right?
So the beautiful thing about Enlist 1 herbicide and Enlist Duo is that we've got over 1,700 approved tank mix partners. So just about anything that you can think of that you want to throw in there to target, problematic weeds in your field is probably going to be on our improved list. We do recommend that you always go check enlisttankmix.com and make sure that those herbicides that you're wanting to add in are approved tank mix partners with Enlist One herbicides, but most likely you're going to find it.
All right. Let's talk about getting it started. What's the best way to start this growing season for growers?
So, as we move into the growing season, I like to start with a good burn down application. So early spring, coming out of the end of the winter, something that's going to get out there and control those winter annual weeds and grasses that have emerged since your last cropping season. We've got great options with Enlist One that you can put out for, to control those winter emerging weeds. We've also got another great product with Elevore that gets used a lot early spring to control a lot of those problematic weeds as we move into the growing season. Once we do that, we get a clean field and then we're ready to plant. When we come in and plant, we like to put something out behind that planter that's going to give us some pre-emergence control. So to give us, a few weeks of weed control as we move into the season, something that's going to help control those weeds. We've got great options. We've got some new options this year, actually the first year on the market with Kyber Pro. That's going to incorporate 3 effective modes of action into a single jug. So you can add 1 jug to your tank, make an application, you've got 3 different herbicides out there controlling weeds as they emerge. And then another great option is going to be Sonic Boom, another new herbicide for us this year. And then we start to move into, those post applications.
And that's it. Once that crop is up, of course, those weeds will be trying to poke their way back up again. How do we keep that field clean?
So once, we get into those post applications, so the crop's up, we've had a few weeks, weeds are starting to emerge, those residual herbicides are starting to wear down. That's when we're going to come in with those post applications. So once again, Enlist One and Enlist Duo are great options. We're going to recommend that you incorporate something else in the tank with those, so something like glufosinate, Roundup, and then even a residual herbicide. So, oftentimes we put out a residual at planting and then we forget about it as we move in those post applications. So Enlist One, glufosinate are going to control those weeds that have emerged during that time period. And then we can add something in there like our preferred tank mix partner, Inversa, which is also a new herbicide commercially available this year from Corteva. That's going to give you, another 4 to 6 weeks of residual control of weeds as they start emerging. So it really prolongs that time that you're getting out of that herbicide application.
Absolutely. Gives your crops a chance to really get their legs under them, get out ahead of these weeds. And of course, for some folks, it's maybe been 9 months, a year since they last ran their sprayer. Any things we ought to remember or tips for us as we get back into that spraying season?
So this is the fun part for me because I grew up on a farm running a spray rig. So, a lot of times when we go to making those herbicide applications, we forget to check a few things. So one thing is that, that sprayer's been sitting up all year. We want to flush it out, make sure that we've got a clean sprayer going into the season, that we've got nothing in there that's going to harm our crop. And then also, look at our nozzles. What kind of nozzles do we have on our sprayer? Are they going to be the correct nozzles to make the herbicide application that we're trying to make, and then keep our pressure on that spray rig in the right range? Using full rates of herbicides. I know oftentimes with commodities where they are these days, it's easy to try to look at places where we can cut. Herbicides is not going to be the place that you want to cut because you're just going to promote that resistance and it's going to give you bigger problems down the road to deal with. With Enlist Duo, it's going to be about 4.75 pints per acre. And then Enlist One is going to be 2 pints per acre or 32 ounces.
Hunter, where would you send our audience if they want to learn more about Enlist beans from Corteva?
If you want to learn about it, Enlist beans that we offer, I'm going to recommend that you reach out to your Pioneer field rep or field agronomist to learn more information. We've got local guys all over the country.
Fantastic, folks. Check that out. Hunter Bowman, Market Development Specialist with Corteva Agriscience. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank y'all for having me.
And if you'd like, you can get more information on the website as well. That's at enlist.com. Before we go for the day, we're going to take a peek at the Cargill Innovation Center in Fort Collins, Colorado. Leave it here.
Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Case IH. Solutions for every challenge. Equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Trade deals have been in the news for the past several weeks, and now we're starting to see some of those trade deals come to fruition. Joining us now to talk about it is Dan Halstrom. He serves as president and CEO of the U.S. Meat Export Federation. Dan, thanks for taking the time to talk with us this week.
My pleasure, Mike. Anytime.
So we saw some positive news come out of the conversation between the Trump administration and the leadership of the United Kingdom. We're going to get more U.S. beef access into the U.K. Dan, is that accurate?
Yes, it is accurate. However, there's a few more details that need to be added. Just to give you a little history, if you remember, we do have currently a duty-free quota into the EU. And UK, before they left for Brexit, had access to that duty-free quota. However, a few years ago, when they chose to leave the EU under the Brexit agreement, they now lost that privilege, and they've been having to pay a duty into on U.S. beef into the UK. So in that regard, this announcement's fantastic news because the announcement did carve out its own unique 13,000 metric ton duty-free quota for U.S. beef. So that's the good news. The opportunity still exists, though, to really make it a more robust deal because some of the non-tariff issues have not been addressed, at least not yet. Remember, this is an agreement in principle with more work to be done. So we're hopeful that some of the non-tariff trade issues can also be addressed. And some examples would be plant registrations, EU residue testing that's required for the EU and for the UK, but not for other trading partners. Acid spray rinses in the plants that are, approved by everybody other than the EU, things like this. So don't get me wrong, it's a great step in the right direction, fantastic news, but we're hoping it's just a first step with more to come.
All right, more work to be done there with the UK, but movement in the right direction. Dan, we've also seen a lot of headlines about the trade agreements and dispute with China. Now, we have had at least one meeting with trade negotiators between those two. They've been a big buyer of U.S. pork in the past. Have we seen any indications that they might be returning to the U.S. pork market?
Well, yeah, the news that came out of last weekend's meetings in Switzerland were very welcome news because, we've heard nothing but a lot of press in the last 120 days about what is and is not going on with China. And for all practical purposes, we've been out of the China market now for the better part of a month. And just to give you a little background there, the pork duty on U.S. pork into China has gone as high as 172%, which in effect, really shuts down all business. However, this announcement last weekend did trim that duty back a bit. Now, these are retaliatory duties by China on us in response to our duties on them. So where we sit today, we're about 57% duty, which is still not ideal, but it does not eliminate all business. So in that regard, it's good news. Beef side, similar situation where we were up 140-some%. We're now back down to 37%. So these are good trends in the right direction. But once again, getting that duty lower is key. And on the beef side, we have another unique situation that's not duty related, and that's the fact that basically all of our plant registrations have expired on beef to China. So it doesn't matter what your duty is if your plants are not eligible. So we're hopeful that those plants will get relisted very soon, and at which point we'll be back into business for China.
We'll be selling a meat again. Dan Halstrom, President and CEO of the U.S. Meat Export Federation. Thanks for joining us this week.
Anytime. Thank you.
Agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier returns now with his extended farm weather forecast for the country.
Earlier in the program, Greg mentioned we might see some rain next week across the country. Greg, who's going to see it?
Probably some sizable rain coverages and amounts where we're actually coming off the heat and some significantly dry weather and allowing for planting progress. And we're still on the cusp of dryness and drought issues here. We'll get it across parts of the Dakotas, Nebraska, in through Iowa. But note the ribbon of 1 to 2, maybe 3 inches extending into the eastern and southern Corn Belt locales. So the specter of flooding on the climb and rise here. Down through Louisiana, I've had 10 inches of rain in this month of May. Severe weather in the southeastern states, across the middle part of the country, scattered moisture into the Pacific West and Northwest early on in the week in particular.
All right, to bring an end to the month of May, Greg, what do you expect to see?
From a temperature standpoint, the last of this cool air surge that'll be dominant here for probably the next week to 10 days, lifting north and northeastward back into the Canadian Prairie. Here is the hot ridge. We're seeing it across open waters of the Pacific and along the Gulf Coast areas too, but the jet stream is still poised in this trough position across the middle part of the country as we welcome in meteorological summertime. So still some busy weather across the Pacific Northwest, southern Canadian Prairie into the northern and eastern Corn Belt. So again, some issues with planting still late in the season here. Moisture is appreciated over the northeastern states and New England. Normal precip for the southeast, but an expanding drier area into parts of Texas and southwestern reaches of the country. No drought improvement expected there whatsoever.
Do you see much movement in that hot ridge for the week of June 2nd?
It is coming into play, and here it is expanding over the middle part of the country with readings in that mid-90 to probably a little better than 100-degree range over the cusp, again, eastern areas of the worst drought. Normal temperatures in the southwest, that's the only way we're going to break the drought down there. We think there's going to be a robust monsoon season in that particular part of the country. The warmth into the Ohio Valley, normal temperatures over the eastern part of the country and back to the west. And we're winding down the moisture pattern across much of the country. Western Corn Belt drying out. Normal precip. Now that's about a half to 3/4 of an inch each week or per week for early June across the middle part of the country, and the Midwest still wet into the easternmost areas, and wet weather continues on down through Dixie, and maybe some rainfall too for Oklahoma and Texas.
Is that hot ridge locked in by the time of the week of June 9th?
And here it is across a good part of the plains and western Corn Belt. A slight retrogression, but building back northward, another little lobe of cool air into the northeast of New England. And here's we come up with some issues. You get rain, but it's these maybe derecho type storms, wind and hail, Canadian Prairie, northern and eastern Great Lakes, up and down the eastern seaboard as dryness and drought return and expand across the middle part of the country.
Our Farm Progress Update is sponsored by Brandt Industries. Lead the field with Brandt's lineup of highly effective and efficient high-speed discs and land rollers. Visit brandt.ca for more. The team of journalists at Farm Progress take their jobs very seriously, and part of that means keeping up to speed on professional development. Pam Caraway, the executive editor of Farm Futures, is the president of the Agriculture Communicators Network. And Pam, what is the ACN?
So the Agricultural Communicators Network started more than 100 years ago. It was originally the American Agricultural Editors Association. And as you might suspect, Farm Progress editors have led the way on these. We have a long history. All but one of our executive editors has been president of ACN, or when it was still AAEA, including our illustrious leader, Mike Wilson.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
A long history with the organization. Pam, why is Farm Progress a part of it?
So multiple reasons, and one of the most important reasons for us to be involved from the Farm Futures side is that we are a guild of the International Federation of Ag Journalists, so we can also bring that global market information to our readers from folks who know. We do a lot of networking with journalists across the world. And on top of that, as we look at all the different platforms, all the different ways that farmers are accessing news about agriculture, about markets, about what's happening rather quickly these days, we are able to learn how to work better on those platforms. Most of us started out as print journalists. Now we provide information on every platform that a farmer might want to get news from.
And the ability of ACN to bring other reporters, editors, journalists, and content creators together lets you brainstorm and just sort of get an idea on the industry and keep up to speed.
Absolutely, and we move from being just ag editors to being ag communicators because we also bring in all those communicators from the farm bureaus, from the various agencies, from industry, from across the breadth of all of the content that's available for farmers.
And then, of course, all of that expertise gets brought back to our Farm Progress publications, to Farm Futures, and out to the farmers, Pam.
Absolutely. And we also meet with a lot of the folks. Yesterday, you moderated a panel where we had folks in from the various checkoff organizations, and we get some of that behind the scenes, what's going on, so we can do a better job of communicating that so farmers can make the best decision for their operation. We're not here to tell a farmer how to do it. We're here to give them the information they need so they can do what works best for them.
That's what it's all about. Of course, Pam, that information comes from Farm Futures, both online at farmfutures.com and the print magazine, which is coming out shortly, correct?
Absolutely. It should be arriving in mailboxes this week. Meantime, we have farmfutures.com If anyone is not signed up for our market newsletter twice a day, you can sign up again at farmfutures.com, and it's free, and it's got a wealth of information and bloggers. You just had somebody from Advanced Trading on, and we have their folks talking to us. We have folks from agmarket.net. We have across the board.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody. Pam Caraway, Executive Editor at Farm Futures, thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike.
Now, on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, where we spotlight another great American farm tractor. Visiting dozens of tractor sheds across this great land over nearly 5 decades, there has almost always, in every instance, been a surprise. I'll talk about it in Max's Tractor Shed, brought to you by Lundell Plastics. Innovators of durable polyplastic augers and other custom products for agriculture, helping bring more efficiency to the farms for over 40 years. LundellPlastics.com. Oh yes, when you're invited into a tractor shed, you'll take some pictures. I do. I'll take some pictures. I'll nose around a little bit. I'll ask a lot of questions, and there's almost always something that I never expected to see. Larry Jenkins provided a little bit of surprise for me when he shared with me what was in his shed. You see a lot of green there in the photographs that he shared with us from Quincy, Illinois. A lot of green. A John Deere R, 75 years old this year. I think that's a John Deere R diesel. There's a 720, big John Deere favorite. I've even seen one or two I liked. And he has a John Deere sign, so that makes it clear, doesn't it? Oh, but wait just a moment. Look back in there a little ways. There's some Persian orange. A tractor that has been here longer than any in Larry Jenkins' shed, an Alice Chalmers WD-45. It was his first. I think I even saw some Farmall red in there in the photographs that Larry shared. So remember, first impressions may not always be accurate. Thanks to Larry Jenkins, Quincy, Illinois, for giving us a peek in his tractor shed. Mark Stock gives us a peek every week at what is about to sell at Big Iron Auctions. Here he is.
Well, hello, Max. The month of May is moving right along, and the auctions continue to flow through Big Iron and Sullivan Auctioneers. May the 21st, Frank Implement in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, will sell a John Deere 9400 four-wheel drive tractor, Case IH WD 1504 self-propelled windrower, Case IH LB 434 XL big square baler, and a Krone Big Pack 1290 big square baler. Also on May the 21st is the John Mumm retirement sale from Alexandria, Nebraska. They'll be selling 2 John Deere S690 combines, a Big Dog 6-yard pull-type scraper, plus a Titan gooseneck livestock trailer. Keith Kroll is retiring. They live by Harold, South Dakota. The auction features a Case IH CX100 tractor with loader, New Holland roll belt 560 baler, Case IH 8920 mechanical front tractor with a loader, International 5088 tractor, New Holland H 8040 self-propelled windrower, 3 Case International 7140 mechanical front wheel drive tractors, a Case 2188 combine, and lots of livestock equipment. To view all of the items selling, go to bigiron.com.
Our FFA Chapter Tribute is brought to you by Gehringoff. Check out the new XFR 50 Draper with 3 times more flexibility than the closest competitor at Gehringoff.com. Gehringoff, proudly built in the American heartland. We're getting to know the National Officer Team with the FFA, and this week we're talking with the President, Thaddeus Bergschneider. Thaddeus, thanks for talking with us again.
Hey, thanks for having me on today.
Now, we had the chance to talk while you were serving as president of the Illinois FFA. Now you are president of the National FFA organization. Thaddeus, what about leadership in FFA is appealing to you?
Yeah, leadership, it's a position, right? This position that I get to hold for a year. But to me, leadership is more than a position, a role, or a year of service. To me, it's all about giving back to your past self in a lot of ways. When I was a freshman, I didn't know if I was going to do FFA. I was a little bit unsure. And for me, it's all about giving back to those members who are now in the same spot. FFA has done so much for me, and I want to be able to give that same gift to the lives of others.
And so, of course, you're doing that. You're out on the road, it looks like. Tell us what it's like as a National FFA president. What are you doing right now?
Yeah, so right now I'm on farm visits in Idaho with the American Falls FFA chapter. Just learned to rope and ride like a cowboy, or trying to be a cowboy. And we're going to go see what potato farming, beets farming looks like compared to, the corn and soybeans that I'm used to in Illinois. So a lot of neat projects. And then this week, more than farm visits, I've gotten to see some neat agri-science projects with Esmeralda from the American Falls FFA chapter, and all the innovations in ag that they're coming up with here and across the country. I mean, as a national officer, I put on 100,000 to 120,000 miles in a year.
That is getting it done. That is hard work for this national officer team, getting out there, telling the story of agriculture and making sure young folks feel welcome in FFA. Thaddeus Bergschneider, thank you so much for talking with us, and good luck with the remainder of your term as president of the National FFA.
Thank you.
Colby Ag Tech is brought to you by AGI, supporting your expertise with industry-leading grain handling, storage, conditioning, and monitoring solutions. AGI, we're right there with you. Chad Colby's right there with you. If you're out in the dark this planting season, he's got some solutions that might just keep you a little safer.
The innovation around cordless equipment really hasn't stopped since it began. And on this week's tech segment, I'm going to feature a couple new floodlights. The first one is a dual-powered triple panel light, and I really like this light. It's compact in size, and the dual power means if you need continuous light at your job site or on your farm or ranch, you can plug it into 120 power right here, as you can see. And then on the bottom, you can use a traditional M18 battery. Run times are ridiculous. It's got all kind of the normal features you would think. You can see it's got magnets if you want to mount to steel. It's got a hook on it if you want to hang it from a rafter or something in a barn. You can see it's got the normal switches on top. You can control if you want all three panels are on, how bright they are. But I love the size, and I love kind of the creativity of it. If you need light in 360, whatever you might need. The second one I want to show you is this compact floodlight with USB charging. You see the battery goes on the bottom. You can see it's got very similar lighting switches. You can turn it on or off. And on the back side, it's got USB charging. Once you clip this on, we'll turn the light on here and show you. It works great. It's so handy to have this maybe in your pickup truck or in your tool bag or in your house or in your barn. They also make a version that has 110 power. To use the USB, you just turn it on, plug your cords in. You know, clearly these lights are so handy just because of the size of them. The performance is outstanding. I took the big Rover light outside. Here it is with all the lights turned on. And then you can see here, you can adjust those panels, which is pretty clever. You can turn them on or off. Maybe you don't need all the light. But what's impressive is, you'll see here in a second as I raise it up, it just has a lot of great coverage. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
Thank you, Chad. And folks, don't go away. We'll have more This Week in Agribusiness when we return. At Cargill's Crop Innovation Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, they're working to build demand for agricultural products. They're working on biofuels and that next generation, but they're also working to help folks cut back on their sugar intake. Eric Reinsvold, the cellular biology lead with the company, talked to me about how they're using stevia to reduce sugar intake.
So the stevia leaf concentrates these compounds called glycosides that are up to 400 times sweeter than sugar or sucrose. So you only need a little bit of this particular compound to give that same sweetness experience that you might expect from sugar.
Now, you mentioned leaf-based stevia. Can you talk to me about what that is specifically? What are you doing there, and why is it still leaf-based?
Right. So we access stevia leaf from different geographies and are actually, pulling those flavor compounds, those glycosides, from the leaf during using different extraction processes. So it's still all coming from the leaf. Whereas we have another product called Eversweet that is fermentation based. It's still the same compound, those glycosides of interest, but they're very focused on these particular chemicals that give a more sugar-like experience. Whereas with the leaf base, you're going to bring a lot of different compounds that might have other flavors that work in some applications but don't work in other applications.
So stevia exists. It's been grown for quite some time, I understand, in South America and in China. What work are you doing here to improve it? What are the challenges you see with stevia that you're trying to address?
So the primary challenges we see with stevia is just trying to address some of those flavor challenges that you kind of talked about. I think the first generation of stevia was great. It brought a sweetness in a sugar reduction solution to the market that consumers really resonate with. But in some applications, it might be a little longer lingering or have some bitterness that we want to address. So we're developing new varieties that have less of that linger and more of those flavor compounds that are more kind of, that consumers would recognize as a sweetness from like a sugar or sucrose.
As you're performing this research and pushing towards these new varieties, how long does it take? What sort of work can you accomplish here in a year for, say, at the Innovation Center?
Right. So in a year, we can get several generations of crossing where we may have a really good line that has great yield in a different geography, but maybe doesn't have that flavor profile that we're looking for. We might have another line that has that flavor profile. We can cross those in months, harvest the seed off of those, grow those, screen them under different conditions, and then select varieties that we want to test further. So we can really do a lot of important, critical work in a short amount of time here at the Crop Innovation Center.
Our thanks to Eric Reinsvold for taking the time to talk to me about how that stevia leaf could potentially help folks reduce their sugar intake. And thank you for catching us here today. Be sure to join us next time, right here, for This Week in Agribusiness. Take care, everyone. This Week in Agribusiness is recorded in the Strauss Studios. For more than 70 years and 3 generations, Strauss has been manufacturing high-performance, German-engineered workwear, work boots, and safety equipment. Prepare for the next growing season at Strauss.com.
This Week in Agribusiness has been brought to you by Case IH. Solutions for every challenge. Equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by 22 Creative Group and has been a presentation of Farm Progress Broadcast. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.